Greetings and welcome to ED 621C Module 12, Analyzing and Evaluating Student Performance Data. For this module, you'll need your Taylor and Nolan book, Chapter 12, and your Analyzing Student Work, which you've been working on already from Module 11. And the rest of this is just the material in the module. So please read and review the module overview so you know what the assignment expectations are for this particular module. In Module 12, these are the objectives for analyzing student work and evaluating standardized data, which is what we're going to be looking at predominantly in this module. So our objectives are that you will make thoughtful, ethical, and reasonable decisions about classroom assessments and assessment practices. You'll identify appropriate relationships between instruction and assessment. You'll practice interpreting assessment data to assess students' instructional needs and to evaluate the success of instruction based on assessment data. So there's an authentic, the ASW piece, and then there's a practice analyzing standardized test measures. So the guiding principles for classroom assessment in general, and we've talked about this early on as well, is the need to gather accurate information about student achievement and to use that data to drive your instruction. It's not just formative, but it actually serves as directional. And use the assessment process and results to promote maximum student learning. So it is all about students. You know about formative, summative, and we're going to talk briefly about norm reference and criterion referenced. And at this point, I will tell you that the main reason and the main focus for this PowerPoint is to help clarify some of the elements that you're going to encounter as you read Chapter 12 in Nolan and Taylor. You will absolutely need to read that chapter for this particular module. It's essential, especially for the evaluation of student performance on the norm and criterion reference tests. So first it talks about different types of assessments that you'll be encountering in schools and using with your students. The first one we're going to look at here very quickly is content or curriculum-based assessments, CBAs, and it's just what it says. These assessments are used to find out what students know and how they're progressing in basic academic areas such as math, reading, writing, spelling, science, social studies, whatever the content is. If you assess it, if you give a quiz, if you use your traditional test items, it's all CBA. So it's basically what you do in the classroom. These assessments provide you the most accurate view of student growth within your classroom context, and context is an important word we're going to come back to. These tests are low stakes. They're formative. You use them to design student instruction, and you use them, you use it to design instruction for students and to maximize their access to the content. The other two are standardized tests. And standardized means that they have been established that everybody that takes them, they take the same test. That's what standardized means, that the items are exactly the same for everybody. There may be different forms, but they are standardized all the same. There are two types of tests you're going to be looking at, norm reference and criterion reference tests. The norm reference tests are the big scary ones, like the NAEP or the SAT. The norm reference tests provide information on how the performance of an individual compares with that of others on the same measure. The individual standing is compared with that of a norm group. So everybody, all fifth graders in a sample of 5,000 students get normed across the bell curve, which I'll show you in a minute, of standardization, of falling along a continuum of proficiency, so to speak, but not the way criterion reference tests are. The percentile rank is obtained to determine the relative standing in the norm group. You will fall in the 55th percentile, then you have performed better than 55% of the students that fall below you. But you don't perform as well as the 45% of the students that are above you. Discriminates between individuals based on rank. And again, I'll show you this layout, this bell curve. Criterion reference tests, although also standardized, provide information on how an individual performed on a specific behavioral or academic objective, or a measure, or a benchmark, or a standard. They allow users to interpret what an individual can do without considering the performance of others. So the individual is scored based on, well, it's designed to measure the results of instruction based on student performance, and it provides a description of performance based on a continuum of proficiency. And so they're not ranked against each other, but the tests are standardized based on student samples and responses to items. And so there's a range of responses to the items. Those responses are scored with usually points. And then if a student falls within a certain point range, then that's how their proficiency is gauged. And this you'll see with the AMP tests that we have here in the state. Those of you that may have encountered the SBAs as kids here, the SBAs were the same. Those are standardized tests, but they're criterions reference tests because they are based on the content standards of the state of Alaska. So terms to know, and you will find this in the chapter, but I want you to have a little closer look at them. Here is what's called a bell curve or a normal distribution curve. And the actual curve is this part right here. And what you see below, and I have a bigger picture of it that I will show you, but just so you know, below are the different types of scores that are used in different types of assessments that are based on this bell curve or this normal curve. So this is what's called a normal distribution curve, and people generally fall into categories in educational assessment in this way, or in psychological assessment, because this actually was developed from psychologists using psychological tests. We have the 23%, we have the 54%, and then we have another 23% here. Sorry, 23%, 54%, so it's both. Well, here we go. I'm not ready for that yet. Stay 9s, 1 through 9 on the standard score. Stay 9s is a scaled score with a mean of 5 and a standard deviation of 2. So let's just take a look here. So we're going to go back and forth between that page and this page. Here's the normal curve, and right now we've talked about stay 9s. So this normal curve, this distribution, has been broken up into 9 equal segments, and those 9 segments are rated here. So if a student makes a stay 9 on a test of 8, they've scored very high. If they make a stay 9 of 4, 5, or 6, it's average. That's why this area is grayed out. If they make a stay 9 of 1, 2, or 3 based on the test scores that they've taken, that means they perform very low. Okay, let's go back. Percentile rank. This is the one you're going to encounter the most, and it's really important that you wrap your brain around this one. A student scoring at the 35th percentile scored as well or better than 35% of the students in the same grade in the norm group. That means that 35% of the students fell below that. But if you think about the above, it also means that 65% of the students exceeded that score. So a common mistake is for people to think that this means the student got 35% of the items correct. That's not the case. It is a percentile rank, and that's what norm tests provide you, is a ranking based on the very large student sample and the normal curve. So if we look at our normal curve again, you can see here we have the percentiles in each section that's equally distributed has a certain percent of respondents that fall in each of these categories. If a student makes 39th percentile, you can add these up to get 39%, or you can look at this, it says percentile rank, and you've got up to 39%. Then this student falls here. That means that other students, this student did better as well or better than this many students. That means that the rest of them, the almost 80%, 40, 50, 60%, my math is horrible, did better than this student. If this student had scored a 22 or even a 32, that's low average. 32 is low average. 32 is not great. It's not proficient. It's not, you can see below average. There's the proficiency levels. If a student scores in the 50th percentile, above and below is the same. 50% better and 50% not as well. If the student scored the 76th percentile, they've done very, very well. That means that 22%, 32% of the students did better than they did, but other than that, they did better than 76% of the other students on the normed distribution. And then 100 percentile, that means that they're way out here. Very unusual to get 100% on just about anything. Means they're almost an outlier. That means they did better than everybody, right? It's not 100%. They didn't get 100% on it, but they fall with 100 percentile. So percentile is a region or an area. It's not an amount. Percent is an amount. Percentile is a region or an area, if you think of it that way. So here you have it set up for you according to the distributions, the standard error of measurement, standard deviations in the normal distribution curve. Percent is the number you get out of 100, and that's just a score. That's just a number. That's a ratio. The normal curve equivalent goes by tens, standard deviations across the normal curve. So it doesn't show you this, but these are basically the normal curve equivalents. So if you looked at NCEs, 1 NCE, 2 NCE, 3 NCE, 4 NCE, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, same as a stay 9 basically. National curve equivalents are basically the same as a stay 9. So, I'm sorry, it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Proficiency range, as you saw, below average, average, above average. And for the criterion-based assessments, they will have proficiency levels of far below average, above average, far above average, and they basically fall into these same categories here. It's very convenient, this distribution curve. Standard error of measurement is a confidence band, and I'm going to explain that to you in another visual in a minute. And grade equivalent based on the norm sample is strictly, you'll see it depends on the test. It'll explain it. This is a 5th grade equivalent, this is 6th grade equivalent, this is 4th grade equivalent. Based on that very large number, those are normed, you'll find those on norm tests. Generally, you will not find them on criterion-based tests because criterion-based assessments are strictly about proficiency levels. So we're talking about the standard error of measurement. Here we have the norm curve again, the bell curve. This is from an Ames web. This is from a kindergarten, actually, oral language assessment. But I wanted to show this to you because it's a good example of how you can look at student data. So they tell you that this is the target, the median. This is the target that a particular item assesses. This is the average range of population included in the sample. It also is the standard error of measurement. If they fall up here on this graph, most of you have done math and you know a box and whisker graph. This student is an outlier, way beyond the 90th percentile. But these are the above average, these are the average, and these are the below average. But this is your standard of error of measurement. This is where people can kind of fall in the range. So if you look at this tiny graph here, you can see how the student is improving. This was fall, winter, and spring testing, and so they are showing improvement. And actually the standard error of measurement is the length of the whisker to the average here. And the longer the length of the whisker, the bigger the standard error of measurement. So it is the longer, the less, the further away from the target it is, the more possibility of it not being accurate is. So it's always a range, it's always a negotiation, and it's basically an approximation, but it's based on a large enough sample that the data is usually pretty reliable. So if you look at this student here, their letter name fluency, their letter sound fluency, their phonemic sound fluency, and their doesn't make sense. Non-sent word fluency are these assessments here, and they've been assessed. And so the letter name fluency, the student does very, very well. Here's the target, and the student does very well. The letter sound fluency isn't so good. This is the target, and they've met the target, but just barely. So they're borderline not proficient. For phonemic sound fluency, they know the sounds of their letters, they do fine, average range. And nonsense word fluency, here. So there's something that would tell me that there's something, perhaps a visual acuity issue with letter sound fluency, that they aren't seeing the letters perhaps, because the phonemic sound fluency is right there. So maybe there's some interesting visual issue going on there. But they can represent scores of a student, and then your school will compile these scores, and you'll see the range of scores that your school has for all the students in that grade level. This is just one way to look at data, but I wanted to just show you that these are all basically normal curves for each item. So they've done an item analysis for all of these. One of the things that on one hand you need to be aware of, and on the other you're not going to have to worry about for the most part until you really start digging in, like say you start working for assessment evaluation in your district or whatever, are validity and reliability. Closer to home validity for you will be your content-based assessments. Does it actually assess what it says it assesses? So for content, that's really where you are. Face validity, expert's opinion. You're the expert, you've created the assessment, you've done the instructions, so basically you're setting up assessments that assess students' ability to show understanding of the content. Criterion means, is that information that you got predictive of future success or failure? Concurrent is something you don't have to worry about. Construct validity basically means, is it constructed well enough to measure what it says it measures? And again, that's actually what you did when you were developing your traditional test items, is you were developing them in a way that you were constructing them in a way that made them valuable and viable as assessments. Reliability, you think of what you did with your rubrics. Can you assess something and get the same response from different people measuring the responses or the performance? So in your case, you're not going to have test, retest, and parallel forms on your own assessments, but the normed norm reference assessments and the criterion reference assessments definitely have test, retest forms and parallel forms, which work to create a sense of reliability of, you can do it again and you can do it again and you can do it again and get the same results on the same items with the same distribution, because they're that clear and consistent. And then the consistency, the inner item consistency and inner rater consistency. Again, can a person rate it that has never seen it before the same as a person who has seen it and rates it? So the biggest piece for you is going to be context. Before achievement test scores can be useful to educators, they need to be evaluated within a context. And you see my picture down here of your classroom. That's your context. For you, that's your context. But it extends beyond your classroom. It is used to plan instruction for individual students or confer with parents. So you have data, you show the parents the data, they say, and you say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Let's talk about this. It is also used to support school or district administrators as they focus on allocating resources, which in our state, the state looks at the data from the schools by grade levels and by content, usually reading, writing, and math. And they say this school is low performing, they need support, we're going to funnel our resources into those schools, and then other schools that are performing better on their own, they seem to have the infrastructure in place, we're not going to worry so much. But that data really does affect funding for schools, and used to empower school staff as they work to improve educational outcomes. So it's sort of like the in-between place between your classroom and the administration. How can we improve educational outcomes for our school and the students in our school? The bottom line is the ultimate user of assessment information is the student. So you always want to share the information with students and to have them set goals based on that data. Not just you as a teacher, but give that information to your students. It's not secret, but you can have a conversation about it, and you can say, how do you want to get better? So now we're moving from this whole normed and criterion reference kind of perspective down into the classroom focus, like for the analysis of student work. So when you're really trying to make decisions for students instructionally, and all measurements have some error, you really want to use multiple sources of information when you make decisions. And so you're going to use some content-based assessments like writing samples and content unit tests. You're going to use some norm or criterion-based assessments such as Ames web scores and criterion-based assessment to get other proficiency levels and other growth levels, performance levels. And you do that because you need to get a big picture, because each of these only provides a snapshot of what the student can do at that time. And there are many, many factors that influence student skill at the time that they take any kind of assessment. And so to get a broader picture and a wider range of data is really, really what you want to do. So this is just in the book, and I know that we use this in the state measures of academic progress, and the RIT is the Ross unit that they use to assess the measures of academic progress, but it's basically a normed test as well. It's kind of like the Ames web. In fact, it is, I think, the Ames web. And then the SBA AMP scores, which are the criterion reference test, which we mentioned earlier. So when you are evaluating assessment data, these are the things you want to keep in mind. So when you're finishing up your analysis of student work, and when you're looking at evaluating standardized test data, both, you want to ask questions. You want to ask, what are my students' strengths with regard to the required knowledge and skills? You want to ask, what are my students' learning needs with regard to the required knowledge and skills? And in your assignment with evaluating standardized test data, the student is an ELL speaker and her parents are ELL speakers, and that is context, and that is something that you really want to keep in mind when you move into talking about that evaluation of her skills. Do students have sufficient foundational content and process skills to approach new learning? So this really gets down into the classroom. And how can I support student learning through scaffolding and differentiation, which brings us right back to instruction. So really your assessment brings you, even the normed reference and the standardized test, any kind of standardized test should bring you back to the classroom. And that's when you get into your collaborative groups at school, you get into professional learning communities, and you take that data and you analyze it and you say, where do we see the patterns? What are these patterns telling us, and where can we go with this now that we have these patterns in mind? And these are the DED website and the ASPE accountability website, which is now, I think, out of date, but you can go to them if you want to check them out and see what they have to say about your school that you're working in or a school you might like to work in. So your task for Module 12 is to review and apply the material in Module 12. All assignments are due per dates on the course schedule. And of course, the reading for Module 12 is a Taylor and Nolan book. And then you will also want to go back and look at the assessment information in the Understanding by Design text. Complete and post steps 1 through 4 of the Analysis of Student Work template. That's what we will doing at the beginning of this week if you're watching at the beginning of the week, but prior to our class 4 meeting, to the discussion forum, so that you'll have it ready to use during our peer review with critical friends. Please identify them by last name, and you do get a point for submission. It's not like a heavily graded piece, but I do at least acknowledge that you've made the effort to submit your work. I do want to point out that it's not just the template that you're submitting with steps 1 through 4 completed, but the student assessment documents that you use to complete it. So if you have a set of writing samples and then the rubric you scored them with, you also need to post those, because those will be part of the conversation. And then attend the class meeting, and then at that time you will be meeting with critical friends, and you will finish step 5 and next steps with them on the template at that meeting, and then you'll fine-tune it up, and then then you will submit the whole thing. This is the second number here, number 5. You'll submit the whole Analysis of Student Work template to the Dropbox in Module 12 by the assigned date on the class schedule, on the course schedule. You are going to complete and submit the reading and using standardized test data assessment to the assignment Dropbox. Actually, it's an assignment, I'm pretty sure, by the assigned due date. And that involves looking at a student profile, answering some questions based on her normed and criterion reference test scores. So that's something that you need. If this module helps you at all, go back and look at this module, the screencast. But the chapter will also help you, the chapter 12. And then there's a reflection for the analysis of student work. So these two go together. But the analysis of student work is in the discussion forum, the reflection, and the actual template is the assignment, the completed template in the Dropbox in Module 12. I hope that was clear. Now, you also have your final course products due, which is after you submit your Module 12 assignments. It's the following week. You're going to submit your final UBD unit with embedded assessments. It will be completely updated with the appropriate assessments, the culminating performance tasks, and the traditional test items, which will be embedded into the respective lessons. And there is an example in the module. You will submit your assessment portfolio according to the criteria in the Dropbox. And by according to a criteria basically means look at the rubric and make sure you do everything that needs to be done. But to help you out, I've given you kind of a list of what it needs to have. A cover page with a table of contents, your 2 GRASP culminating performance tasks, and their attendant rubrics. You can either put them together or you can do the GRASP first and then the rubrics. You can do the GRASP with their rubric and the other GRASP with their rubric. The test bank of traditional test items and their answers and the responses, the entire test bank, and a copy of your completed, should say, analysis of student work template. No supporting documents are required for your final submission, just your final analysis of student work template. And then a copy of your reading and using standardized test data assignment, the one that you filled out. And if you want to include ones with marks for me, that's fine, but you definitely need to include a copy of that in your portfolio. So that's your portfolio. Those are the items that need to be in your portfolio. There's no reflection. I'm not sure just what happened here. There's no reflection necessary for that. There is, however, a reflection and a course reflection in the Dropbox in Module 12. And it has its own Dropbox there. So just read over the Module 12 folder for everything you need. Go through it. There's a special Dropbox for your final course products, and then there's the regular Dropboxes for your assignments for Module 12. So I hope you enjoy putting all this together. I'll be interested to see your submissions for the evaluating the standardized test data. That's always a little tricky, and I just highly encourage you to spend some time with the text. And if any material in this screencast helped you, for example, the normal curve, I suggest you go back and look at that material as well. So with that, carry on. Let's see what comes out of this final section of ED 621C and your end of course ED 621A, B, and C. Well done.